Turf monster. Let's talk about the turf in general. Let's keep talking about that. We're still gonna roll it into injuries, but like how do you guys feel about the turf? Like, I think I guess it's sort of like I think it's kind of underreported how the NFL and even frankly the NFLPA. Okay, go ahead.
No, let's just stop blaming turf. All right.
Okay. Oh,
if you look at grass and turf, all right, the data will show you that if the turf is maintained the way it's supposed to, the data is not that far off between the two. Okay.
Yeah.
What we don't ever talk about and should talk about are cleats. The cleats have gotten lighter, cheaper, and I think they're more susceptible to players getting injured.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that like no one ever talks about. Like I'd rather see data dating back to, I think 2012 was the first year that Nike took over as the apparel provider. And I'd love to see the data from that point moving forward to see if we've had an increase in athletes, and depending on the type of cleat that they're wearing, and whether it's a speed cleat or low top, high top, what have you. I'd really want to look at that data because I feel like you don't seeing quite as much or quite as many of these sorts of injuries even dating back to times when we had AstroTurf. And obviously Reebok was the supplier then. And I don't know because what happens is if guys don't have apparel deals with Under Armour or Nike or what have you, they default back to whatever the league's apparel provider is. So that would be Nike in this case. So most guys don't have apparel deals. So if they don't, they're wearing some sort of Nike cleat. And my issue is like, I feel like that always gets lost when we talk about these injuries is we never look at the actual shoes they're wearing. And that probably, at least in my opinion, I think plays the biggest role. Every single injury I ever had was a Nike cleat. And look, I'm not trying to say that all of a sudden like Nike is to blame 100% for all of it. But when I think about some of the cleats that I wore and how easily they wore out, how flimsy they were, how I had to have orthotics in them to strengthen the lower foot plate, like all those things. And Lejay, I don't know if you felt similar, but like, yeah, there's no doubt, like I'd rather play on grass than on turf. But that being said, I still feel like that whatever I'm wearing on my feet is still paramount to whatever surface I'm playing on in regards to how my foot feels, bends, and all that in those situations.
Well, I would ask you this, Brady, when you're talking about injuries as far as in the league, not college, right? Or are you talking about college too?
I'm talking about both. But I mean, but the data, obviously, if you're in the NFL, you want the sample size from the NFL.
Correct.
Because that's specifically what I'm referring to here when you look at the data coming from 2012 afterwards and then before that with Reebok.
Well, and I would point out too, like the one thing that Nike was doing for a long time in the early 2010s was pushing Flyknit as something that they wanted to be like the future of the sport because it was it was so light, it was light, breathable, you were faster on your feet, but then you saw was he wearing Nikes when he blew out his and like he blew out his shoe and he blew his tire. If you go to nike.com/Flyknit, you have Nike Flyknit for running. Now it makes total sense for running because you're you're lateral, you're not cutting laterally when you're running
lateral stuff,
right? Yeah. And if you look at their basketball Flyknit shoes, they've been reinforced completely differently on the outside, which I think is about the lateral cuts and all that because they were having issues. I think Kobe had an issue too. I think Kobe's knee injury when we got fixed in Germany. He was wearing Flyknit when that happened. And then you have the Flyknit for soccer. Makes total sense because you need a light, breathable shoe. You do need to cut, but you're nothing for football anymore, which I think is interesting. They got rid of it for it's not available for football because the football cleat needs to be sturdier because the impact is completely different.
Well, and just to further that point, the tough part is if you do have an apparel deal, you can't spat, right? You can't tape over top of it. You can't cover up the logo. Some of those times they won't even let you cover up any portion of the shoe because they want to make sure when you're on TV when you're playing, everyone sees it. And so that becomes then a liability because you're taping your foot, but then if it loosens up, some guys like to tape their feet and spat and tape over top to create that extra layer of restriction to be able to hold it together better. And so that's the other part of like the business side of it that sometimes it's not even as safe, even with the way you're going about wearing that cleat because of the rules and how you have to show the logo and everything else. So again, I don't want like Nike to come after me or anything like that. I'm just saying.
I love Nike. I love Nike. Don't come after us.
Not many people have brought this question up. And I just know from the injuries that I've sustained that it was always a Nike cleat. And every time I say something to someone who's in the know about this, they're like, "Yeah, you're onto something there," and they're like, but they won't say anything because they obviously they know how much Nike's paying them to be the apparel provider for the NFL. There's not really much you can say at that point.
Yeah, there's so much to dive in here. Like when me and Brady were in the league, he talked about it. Reebok was the official partner of the NFL, right? So I actually had a Reebok deal my first 3 years in the league before Nike came over. And to his point, right, I wanted to spat but couldn't, right? They actually fined me one game for spatting because I covered the Reebok sign.
That's insane.
But I actually got my ankle injury in a Reebok shoe, and it went out, and it happened when I wasn't spatted, right? So I was pissed off about that. There was something that Brady said that really resonated with me. He was saying, as far as if you do the research between turf fields and grass fields, right, and if there's actual upkeep. So that's the biggest thing, right, Brady? You know this because you played in the winter city, right? You played in Cleveland. I played in New York most of my career. When it snows, I don't think people realize this, and they have to clear off the field of the snow. You know how much rubber is taken off the field? So I want to know, I would love to see the analytics and the data behind that when that happens. Like I played in the AFC East, right? That's Gillette Stadium, which is up there in Massachusetts. That's Buffalo, and that's MetLife. And then Miami has grass, right? So for a lot of my career, I was playing in those games in the winter. So like, I mean, Buffalo, when it gets cold and it snows, it's literally like concrete out there trying to cut on there. Same thing with Gillette Stadium. Same thing with MetLife. So yeah, I know what the analytics and the research says is in regards to turf and grass fields, but I would love to see in specific months, late November all the way through February, how that number changes, because it's hard to upkeep that field because so much rubber pellet is getting taken off the field because of the snow when they clear the field.
Yeah, I mean, usually they do and I've seen them do this before, because back when Baltimore had field turf, they would actually do a test. So they drop something on to see like the bounciness in the spring of it.
Yeah.
I remember being out there warming up one time when they were testing. I was like, all right, that's at least good to see.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I was like, all right, they're testing it. I don't see them putting any extra infill, so I assume
Correct.
it's passing the test.
Yeah.
You know, we never really know. Look, we all know that the field service is there because it allows them then to do more in that particular service throughout the course of the week, football season, to make more money. You know,
Nickelback concerts and whatnot.
Exactly.
Yeah, or Creed, depending on if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan and how that's helped propel that team this year. But the general point is like, obviously, you're not going to have in many places the ability to have, at least not in a cheap manner, a grass field indoors, which we know a lot of stadiums, especially up north, they want to be able to put domes. And in order to do that, you have to take what's the soccer team that's got the grass field that folds out underneath, and it's like they have a whole thing helping to grow the grass. Or what's the big soccer team?
It's Tottenham, isn't it?
I don't think it's Tottenham. Maybe it's Tottenham.
Manchester United.
It's I think it's wherever Manchester plays, maybe. But anyway, one of those fields have this elaborate system. It's ridiculously expensive, but they maintain it because their roster is ridiculously expensive. So
it's probably Man U.
Well, no, I know it is Tottenham because I remember when the NFL went there, they switched it out and put turf on for the football players, but then they switched it to the grass for the soccer players,
which made no sense. So
yeah.
I think the interesting thing about that is if you're looking at like grass in the wintertime, like we all think, oh, it should be softer, right? Well, it depends. Like sometimes, like where it's painted, that stuff freezes. That's actually ice. It's slick.
It hurts.
And they've got it. And like the ground is hard, right? Especially when it freezes over at certain those frigid temperatures. So as much as you're making a case Leger for like, hey, how many of those pellets are still there when they brush it off? Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're on field turf or grass. At that point, it's going to be pretty hard, pretty rough. I mean, I think when you're in adverse conditions, you're probably more, or I should say, less at risk to get injured. Depending on the cleat, doesn't really matter because your footing's not great anyway. And so you're not applying the same force. You're not cutting as hard. You're not in those situations. So, again, I would just like to see a study and the data from the past decade or 11 years since Nike's taken over in comparison to the prior decade or so to see how that's played a factor. And look, maybe there's other factors. How spread out the game is now. Guys playing more in space. Guys are able to build up more speed, sharper cuts, more aggressive cuts. Maybe that plays a role in it too, in the way some of these players have ended up hurting themselves with just, again, combined with the cleats and the surface they're playing on.